good, so good. Hey, if you're here for the first time, welcome. My name is Beth. I get to serve as our lead pastor, and as you just saw, we celebrate change lives all the time here at Prairie Heights. And so, friends, last Sunday, we had 32 people who went public with their faith, and so incredible. Each of those stories are so powerful. As I was walking around before the service began, I'm seeing a lot of faces of people who just got baptized last Sunday. And whether last week you had the worst week of your life, because that happens sometimes, right? In our spiritual journeys, where when we get closer to Jesus, all of a sudden some things start to distract us. Or you had the best week of your life. I'm so glad that you're here, and we pray that there's more freedom in your life and in your story. And so that is what we celebrate as a church family. We celebrate what God is doing in your life. And I want to say, thank you for sharing your story. Like there always is a lot of hard things, also a lot of celebratory things that we get to share in people's stories. And I want to say thank you. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to share your story. I was reminded this last week as I was preparing this quote from Bob Goff. And Bob Goff, he's an author, he's a speaker, he's a leader, he's a dreamer. And here's what he said. He said, God, he didn't give us stories so we could look important. He gave us stories so we could show how important he is. And isn't that true? Like, not only, yes, do we want our lives to be changed when we grow closer to Jesus, but really it's a reflection of Jesus in our life that we get to show and share with the world. And so your stories that you shared last week, if you got baptized, they impacted thousands of people. I want you to sit in that for a second. Your story, what God is doing in your life, has already impacted thousands of people. And you might ask, like, well, in what ways? For some people, it meant that they might be going from a place of skepticism of their walk with Jesus, and by hearing your story, they start to get curious and start to lean in a little more. For others, they maybe are inspired because they could relate with something that went on in your life, and they saw how you overcame it. And you had the courage and the bravery to keep believing in Jesus when things got hard. And so for them, they're deciding, I'm going to keep believing in Jesus too. Because friends, when we share our stories, it's so powerful. Stories are so powerful because stories can be change agents in our lives, right? And so today we're starting a series. It's a 2-part series, and it's called What's Your Story? And what we're going to do in this series is our number one goal is to help you share your story. We want to help equip you and give you tools so that you can share your story and share your faith. And that sounds really simple, doesn't it? Like, just go share your story. That sounds simple, but if I could guess, it's a little harder than it sounds. It's a little more difficult for most of us to just go and share our story and share our faith in our everyday life. If I can guess, I might ask you, like, do you find it difficult to share your story with someone who doesn't know Jesus? Have you ever been in a situation where you started to feel that nudge? Like you knew in your spirit God was inviting you in this moment with whoever it was with to start to share your story, and you didn't? Because you're like, I don't know how to do that. Have you ever felt insecure about, like, what parts of my story should I share and which parts shouldn't I? Should I leave that part out or should I share it? Maybe you've had a little bit of insecurity in that. Maybe the truth is some of the people that you work with, or some of the people that report to you, or some of the people that you go to school with, some of your friends even, maybe there's fear inside of you that, man, if they knew that I love Jesus, if they knew that my faith was on fire, they might stop inviting me to things. They might stop following me on socials. That's social media for people 40 and older. I try. It's hard. It's hard for me. And so if you're under 40, you can just shake your head and give me a hug later. I'm trying. But isn't it true? Like, it sounds simple to share our story, but it can be really difficult to live out. But what if, friends, what if sharing your story was more than just words? What if sharing your story was more than just saying some words? And so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to share our Prairie Heights story. I'm going to share people's stories, and then I'm going to share God's story. And that's what we're going to spend our time on today. And so through hearing these stories, here's what we're going to do is we're going to celebrate the faithfulness of God. Celebrate the faithfulness of who God is and gain an understanding of how sharing our story can be so much more than words. Okay, so I'm going to start with our Prairie Heights story. And many of you don't know this, that there's a family by the name of John and Terry Hauser, and back in 1990, way back in the 90s, in 1990, John and Terry Hauser and their son Nate, he was young at the time, they began to feel a wrestling. They were living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and they felt called to move to Fargo to start a different kind of church. And in this dreaming and in this call, they were called to come here to start a church for people who didn't already go to church. And so as they came here, and John picked like 8 people, and he said, hey, will you come and have free breakfast with me? And he gave them a free breakfast, and one of those individuals is a regular part of our church. You see him ushering, his name's Todd, and he says, I just showed up for a free breakfast. And now here he is, 24 years later, still hanging out, serving, loving people. And John cast a vision, telling people, hey, do you want to be part of this dream to start a church for people who don't go to church, to start a place where all people would feel welcome, to be a place where we would serve our community, and with no promise that it would actually work. Okay, and so a group of people, small group of people, got behind that vision, and the Hauser family, alongside these early believers, we call them the originators, the people who really began and started to execute the beginning of this vision that was placed on the Hauser family. Here's what they did, friends. They would go door to door and give flyers. They served our community so many times, much before the first service, much before the first gathering. They were crazy about serving our community over and over and over again with no strings attached. And one of the, as you can see, it looks nothing like today, right? And I think that's important for us to remember, is that we didn't start this way. But the heart of our story remains consistent. One of the slogans from the early years was this: short on formality, long on relationships. I always chuckle when I see that. And it's just a good reminder that relationships really matter. And it's on that faith foundation that we stand on. And so, friends, on April 1st of just this week, when April 1st came, April 1st of 2001, April 1st of 2001 was Prairie Heights' first ever service that they held at the Doublewood Inn. And at that service, there was a couple people who are here today who are part of our church family, have been part for many, many years. And they're going to come share a little bit. And so as Chris and Dion come, Weinberger, you guys come on up. You might be thinking, like, April 1st, why would you do that? That's April Fool's Day. And everything was done on purpose. On purpose, they did their first service on April 1st, on April Fool's Day. And so Chris and Dion Weinberger, thank you so much for joining me on stage, whether reluctantly or excitedly. But would you share with us, so you were at the first service of Prairie Heights, but you also, Dion, tell us, you were there before that. How'd you get invited?
So my wife Chris and I had just moved to the area in August, and we got invited to the very first, what they called preview service. And so we had a connection with one of the families that was there, and so we decided, okay, well, we'll go check it out. And we walked in, there's about 15 people in the room, and we're kind of like, a little awkward. And but it ended up being some amazing connections. We connected with people we knew but hadn't seen in years. And so it was kind of like, it was a lot like it is today. You walk in and you're greeted with a smile, high fives, hugs, and you really just kind of felt like you were just part of something. And so that was an amazing start.
And like as you came to that first pre-service, they called it, how quickly, how short or how long did it take for you guys to get plugged in and to get connected?
About 5 minutes. So we walked in, and
when you're starting something.
Yeah, Chris was greeted by a friend that she knew, and was asked to be on the worship team. And so she didn't sing that Sunday, but she sang at the second preview service in October. And I had actually watched Pastor John throughout the service try to do double duty. So he was trying to be the tech guy and preach. And well, that's a challenge. And so he was, he would step over and he would push the key on his computer and advance the slides and stuff like that. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, hey, I can help with that. And it took him about half a second to accept that offer for assistance. And so that kind of started something. And, we left there that day, and we had just this amazing sense of friendship, of community, of belonging. But more important, we actually left knowing we were needed, and we were able to contribute. And so that was it was an amazing thing. And it just kind of started this journey. We really knew that it wasn't just our friends that had called us. It was really the Holy Spirit that had invited us and started on this amazing 25-year journey.
Yeah. It's
and
incredible.
So to be part of something that has been able to change the lives of thousands of people in our community and change our community has just been an incredible blessing, and we just can't wait to see where God goes next.
Yeah. Dion, love you. Thank you for sharing that. And as you shared you said, yes, some of the things, 15 people and look different and doing slides and, getting plugged into the worship team in the next month and some of the entrepreneurship of that early years. You also said, but there's a lot that hasn't changed. So Chris, can you talk about Chris, why don't you share about you talk about our mission. And our mission to connect those apart from God with Christ and church family. And what's it been like to be part of this for 25 years?
Yeah, being a part of this church plant has just been such one of the greatest journeys we could have been on. And we were sold on the mission immediately. And in those early years, we just did whatever it took to get people in the door. And we thought once they'd get in the door, they would hear a relevant, life-changing message of hope, hear wonderful music and worship, and feel connected. And we would get to plant seeds of God's love in people's hearts. And then God would do what he does. He would draw them unto him and start changing and softening hearts. Yeah. And that's been the best part of all these years, is seeing people say yes to Christ. Yes, I want to surrender my life to him. And I can't help but think that this building, our church where we stand today, used to be a farmer's field where seeds were planted in the ground and God brought a harvest. And all these years later, we're still doing that. We're planting seeds of God's love in people's hearts, and he brings the harvest. And that's just been the greatest part, to see his faithfulness of what started 24 years ago. Yeah. And it's more than we could have ever dreamed or imagined. And it doesn't get any better than that.
It doesn't. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for saying yes back then, and thank you for saying yes today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Can you give it up for these two? I just want to take a second, and this might be a little different, but if you've only come to Prairie Heights since this facility has been open, can you stand up? If you've only been at Prairie Heights since this building has opened. And I just want you to look around for a second. And Chris and Dion and Todd and Andy and Renee and Deb, and there's so many that are here, some of the people who have been here for 24, 25 years. I want you to look at these. If at any point you had said it's too hard, it's too expensive, too much sacrifice, look at Tom and Chris. Pretty special. You can sit down now. Pretty special. Thank you for doing that. It gives us a visual of God and his movement over time. And so as we've shared this week, we celebrate 24 years. 24 years of God's faithfulness. 24 years, our 24th birthday, and we celebrated 32 people who went public with their faith. And that, friends, the 32 people from last Sunday, it kind of knocked over this threshold, a huge milestone. And so drum roll with me, please. In 24 years, there have been 1,010 people who have been baptized at Prairie Heights. Woo! Super incredible. Incredible to see God's faithfulness. And so I just want to spend one last thank you. There are many people who have been a part of our church for those 24 years. And the Hauser family, the originators, many leaders who are here and many leaders who are leading in other places in our community and across the country. And just want to say thank you to every single person who has had a part in Prairie Heights' story. And 24 years in, and we continue to celebrate our commitment to connect those apart from God with Christ in a church family. And so because we care about that and we care about you and we care about your experience, we want to do something that hasn't been done since those early days. And it's been quite a few years since we've revisited asking people, okay, tell us, how has your experience been? And are we really, when we talk about our mission to connect those apart from God with Christ in a church family, are we doing it? And so we're going to spend 5 minutes and you're going to take a survey. Okay, you're going to help us know how we're doing in our mission. And so this is the Prairie Heights Church Survey, 5 minutes. Scan this QR code right now. We are going to take a 5-minute time to do that. So if you're in the room, scan the QR code. Right now, you can begin filling out that survey. If you did not bring your phone, you can raise your hand and an usher will bring a paper copy to you. So raise your hand high. An usher will bring you a paper copy, and then when you're done with the paper copy, just throw it back up in the air, and an usher will come get that. If you're watching online and you're watching on your phone, you might be thinking, how do I scan a QR code from my phone? You can tap it. Just tap the QR code if you're watching online to get the survey, or if you're in the chat, you can click the link. All right, thank you. 5 minutes. Let's take time to do this. You did it. Thank you for doing that. That is just really important, like I said, to us to know some details of your story and your journey, and also a few things about your experience. That is going to help us continue to connect those apart from God with Christ and a church family. And so thank you for taking time to do that. Now we're just going to be together for another 30 minutes. I'm kidding. Okay, so back to the question that I posed earlier, right? What if sharing your story was more than just saying words? Like, what if sharing your story was more than just saying words? And to understand really how to answer that question in your life, it's really important that you understand how your story fits into the bigger story, how all of our stories fits in to God's story, and even like grapple with like, why is it so important that each of us would choose to be part of a church family? And so how we're going to answer that is through a conversation that Jesus has with Peter. And Peter is one of Jesus' closest followers, but Peter was like the shoot aim kind of person, you know, like never really aimed and then shot, but was kind of all over the map. And so here's this really important couple of verses that we hear this conversation between Jesus and Peter that really help us understand what the church is really built on. And so it comes from Matthew 16, 15, and 16. And there was all this dialogue about like, who are people saying Jesus is? And Jesus looks at Peter and he says, well, but what about you, Peter? He asked, who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? And Simon Peter answered, he says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That is really important. And we're not talking about this part today, but it's really important that each and every one of you decide, who is Jesus to you? And Peter had been following him for a long time, and at this point he's like, hey, I know that you are the Messiah. I know that you are the Son of the living God. And then Matthew 16:17, Jesus replied and he said, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. See, Jesus knew that there was an internal, there was a soul and a spirit change in Peter, for Peter to realize who Jesus really was. And in Matthew 16:18, Jesus says something so powerful. He says, I tell you that you are Peter. He calls him by name, and he says, and on this rock. And what it means by rock, it means on the faith. On what Peter just said, it was faith that Peter said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus replies and he says, I tell you that, Peter, and on this rock, on your faith, Peter, on this rock I will build my church. And the gates of Hades, the gates of hell will not overcome it. And I want to give a little bit of context. Church in this verse, church is translated from the Greek word ecclesia, which back then, what's important to recognize is back then, it simply meant just a gathering of people who were after a specific purpose. And back then, there were no buildings. Back then, there were no creeds. Back then, there were no Bibles. Back then, it was a group of people who began to follow Jesus Christ because they believed that he was the Son of God. That was their common ground. And they began to gather, and Jesus said, on Peter's faith, on the faith of people, on the stories of people's lives being changed, I will build my church. And then what does he say? In Matthew 16:18, at the end of that, he says, the gates of hell. I'm going to give a little more emphasis. And it's like the only time I should say that word. The gates of hell will not overcome it. When our lives are changed by Jesus Christ, other people don't get to decide whether that's right or wrong. Anything that Satan tries to do in your life to distract you, to tempt you, to have you living in sin, even though that is hard, and those are hard places to be when you're sitting in that, we are reminded that Jesus Christ has victory over sin and death. And when he is our Lord and Savior, we can have victory over all those things in our life. It's our story. And it's a part of God's larger vision and purpose on faith, on people, on stories. Jesus says, I will build my church, and hell doesn't have a chance. The church will live on through people, no matter what happens, through people who build their faith on the belief that Jesus is the Son of God. And it's as simple as that. And so, friends, when we share our story, we're inviting people into not just our lives, but we're inviting them into God's story. That's really important to realize that gives us confidence. That should give you confidence and courage to go out there and share your story, because when you share your story, it's not just your story, it's God's story. And people need to hear God's story. Hope, she was one of the individuals who got baptized this last Sunday. One of the 32, and we were able to capture more of her story, and so I want you to go ahead and take a look at Hope's story.
My name is Hope, and I've been coming to Prairie Heights since last Easter. Maybe, I think it was a Sunday or two before Easter services. My eldest daughter had invited me to church, and we were pretty estranged at the time, not talking too much, and so I would have went anywhere she asked me. And so even though church probably wasn't like my top shelf idea, probably would have rather have gone to lunch, but I was like, okay, I'll go anywhere. So we went to church, and I really, like, the first 3 or 4 times I came here, all I did was cry. Then I stopped crying and I started listening, and I was hooked. But the whole time I just felt like a clean slate. I really felt like I had been made new. And I think it was because I had gotten sober. And I got sober in treatment. I'm not one of those stories where I was a horrible addict and I went to church and then I got out and I was like, I don't want to do drugs anymore. I love God. No, I had to lose my kids. I lost my kids to foster care. I lost my son when he was 10 days old. They took my newborn baby from me. And they took my daughters. And that was like the point where first I sunk really deep into a hole, then I crawled out of it. My addiction started really small. I was just, smoking pot with my friends. It started really small and almost innocent. And then I met a guy and he had a meth. He had a problem with meth, and I was like, I'm gonna try it. I want to do what you're doing, and so it just seemed like this great thing, and it just got ugly and sinister so fast. When you're that far into it, like when you're shooting up and you're using, street drugs like that, you're so lost, and you don't think there's any way out of it. I don't know how many times that I just wanted out of it. I just prayed. So I just really felt like there's no way that I could be good enough for God. It wasn't until I came here that I just felt it in a way that I couldn't deny it. And it was like, if you have to earn your salvation, then what did Jesus do? Like, if you're working so hard to earn this salvation, why did my son give up his life? Jesus died for my salvation. I don't have to earn that. All he wants from you is just that surrender. Is just saying, I can't do this all on my own. I need you in my life, God. You are where the forgiveness and the joy and the love and the happiness that everybody wants is. Because if God can love me the way that he loves me, then he can love anybody.
There aren't a lot of words I need to say after that, so powerful. But I do want to connect a couple dots, a couple things I want you to know, you're part of her story. You're part of her story of finding hope and healing and freedom. And as I was just watching that and I see her walking through that hallway with the shirt and it says new life, it's like, man, I love that God gives us an opportunity at new life. It is so special. And then it's like, hope, give her a microphone, preach it, girl. You don't need to earn salvation. And some of you need to hear that today. You don't need to earn God's love. You don't need to earn or do enough good deeds in order to get to heaven. That's not God's story. God's story is one of love and grace and forgiveness and mercy. And it's hard for us to understand the depths of the grace that God has for us, that he sent his one and only son so that we could have life and have life to the full. And so when I pray at the end of service today, I'm going to give you the opportunity. There are some of you that need to say yes to Christ. That's what we call it at Prairie Heights. You need to take the step to say, hey, I want to invite Jesus into my life. And part of what Hope was describing in her story, that's so true for so many stories, is one of the things that kind of holds us back from taking that first step is we think we have to have our life together. There's a lot of people in your life who are living apart from Jesus that they think they have to get their life together before they step foot in a church. And that is the exact opposite of what God had in mind. It's the exact opposite of what Jesus had in mind. He said, come, everybody, and know the hope and the truth and the love that I have to offer. And when you choose me, Jesus saying, when you choose me and you follow me, that is a life of freedom. That is a life of continued hope. And so God's story and our church's story and your story, those aren't just words. And the other part of that is it's relational. That's what we mean by it's not words. Sharing your story isn't just about words, it's about relationships. It's about our relationships with one another. It's about the relationships in your life. You know, one of the things that you've maybe heard this before, St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. What does that mean? Go out and live your faith. Go out and treat people the way that Jesus calls us to treat people. Go out into the world and into your work and into your home and into the grocery store and into the places that you go and preach the gospel at all times. Preach the love of Jesus Christ through your life. And so what I want to ask you is a couple questions, and then I'll give you a couple to-dos in how to share your story. A couple questions. Is your life invitational? What do I mean by that? I mean, do you invite people into your life? Do you invite people along into the things that you might be doing? Do you allow people to know your story? Do you invite people into your home? Do you let people in emotionally and spiritually? Or are you pretty closed off? You don't talk about it. Compartmentalize. Go to church on Sunday and don't talk about it until the next Sunday. Where are you at in that spectrum? And so depending on where you're at, what now? I want to challenge all of us to share your story through relationship. Share your story through relationship. And I want you right now to think about somebody in your life who doesn't know Jesus. Maybe you are somebody today. I want to say welcome, so glad you're here. Keep coming, keep asking questions. But those of you that are following Jesus and you're ready to share your story, you don't have to have words, you got to have relationship. And so think about the person that in your life who doesn't know Jesus or isn't connected to a church family. And here's some next steps I want to invite you to. For some, it may be inviting that neighbor to your house. Like even the one who's really frustrating. Maybe it's saying like, hey, maybe we should just invite him over for dinner. The one that has the opposite political beliefs than you. Do it. You can do it. You love Jesus. You'll make it. Like invite that neighbor to your house for supper. Be hospitable. Be generous. Show them Jesus. Others of you, maybe you need to invite a friend for coffee to listen to their story, not to share your story, but to listen to their story. Maybe there's someone in your life that you know that's struggling, and you know that if they got connected to a church family, it wouldn't change their circumstance, but it would change them. And they don't need you to go up to them and say like, hey, have you ever read the Bible? Here's a free Bible. They need you to sit down and listen to their story. They need you to sit down and hear them and for you to show them love and grace and mercy through listening to their story. Maybe others of you, it's inviting, there are people in your life that you do need to invite to church. That for whatever reason, you've just been shy about that. Maybe there's a family member, maybe there's a coworker. And it's time for you to not be shy anymore, because it matters. And I want you to know one of our biggest times of the year is Easter. People who don't know Jesus are more apt to say yes to coming to Christmas or Easter. And so I want you to be brave and pick a couple people and invite them to celebrate Easter here or somewhere else. That's not the point. The point is that you're sharing your faith. You're inviting people in, and you're doing it through relationship. There's a lot of ways to share your life with others. And so I just want to encourage you to share your life with others and share your story through relationships with the people that you already have relationship with in your life, or you start a relationship. Because it's one thing to have an agenda, those conversations where the other person has an agenda. And I'll tell you every week, I have an agenda. I'll just be clear. I have an agenda. I want you to fall in love with Jesus. And I want you to surrender more of your life to Jesus. That's my agenda. I'm okay with that one. There's a lot of other agendas that aren't super healthy. I'm okay with that one. What would it look like if you were okay with that? The mission that Jesus has called us to go share his story, because it's not our story, it's his story, out into the world so that more lives can be changed. Sharing our story isn't just about words, it's about relationships, friends. And so let me say a prayer for all of us. God, I thank you for this day, and I thank you for this time to really share our story, our church's story, your story, God. And I pray right now for the people who they haven't said yes to you yet, and they want to say yes to you. And Lord, right now in this moment, I just pray that you would change their heart, and that, God, they would say yes to you in their heart. It's as simple as that, believing that Jesus died on a cross, that he rose again 3 days later, victorious over sin and death. And that when we receive him, we can have freedom and we can have life. And then we get to begin the journey of following him, and our life doesn't have to be put together before that moment. And so if that's you today, just say yes in your heart as a representation of that. And for others who are following Jesus, would you give us the courage to share our story? Would you give us the courage to go out into the world, into our workplaces, into our homes, and to share the hope and the truth of Jesus Christ with those around us, and to invite people in to that journey? Thankful for today and thankful for you, God. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.